So it really was a big cultural shift that was introduced in order to make sure that there was a real favour towards performance rather than presenteeism. So it's done in a couple of ways across the business at different levels. So there are options for home working, options for professional staff, and options for executive staff within the business. But all of them centre around a few key principles, which are, the organisation trusts you to get the work done.
Okay, so agile working or smart working is very much output-based rather than sort of hours-based, would you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It really is that as long as the work gets done, then it doesn't necessarily matter where it gets done. It can be from home as long as it's not anything to do with classified security information. It can be done at any time of the day. We're not rigid to a big 37 hours a week policy. If you can do your work in less time and you've got the output and, you feel comfortable in that, then people aren't measured for the time. They're measured for the work. So very much around the performance of individuals.
And when did you actually implement this policy? How long have you been working this way?
So it was implemented before I joined the company. So I joined in 2015, and I think it had been in place around about a year then. So it was still in the bedding in stage, but it was one of the big attractions actually for me to join the company in the first place was that they told me, HR told me while I was in the interview process, that they had this smart working policy, and what they really needed was some more leaders who wanted to use it and be seen to be using it, because you can roll out these things and then it just becomes about people saying that they have these policies but no actual change on the ground. So it was a conscious decision that they wanted to employ leaders who were going to be seen to be using those policies in order to roll out a huge culture change.
Okay, and how have you sort of managed it day to day? Is there any culture change internally for the actual management of that process, or how do you kind of do that?
So, it's not managed other than, the policy's there, it's rolled out, it's for people to use. Really it's self-governing. There's nothing that needs to be done other than, keep promoting and keep making sure that people are aware. I would say you see the benefits of it, obviously, in terms of the empowerment of individuals and people being trusted to use it, but it's not something that needs governing on a day-to-day basis. I personally use it because I have childcare. So, you can shift it whichever way you like. Some people start late, have a line come in and work late. I shift it the other way. I come in generally early, leave about 4 o'clock, go home, put the kids to bed, and then maybe log in again. It really is about, your schedule better than anyone else. You know what your own needs are, whether it's, going to the gym, having childcare, having family to take care of, elderly parents, or whether it's just, your own work-life balance. It's about making sure that you can manage your own time effectively.
I think there's a real shift now within recruitment and within businesses to make sure all employees have that kind of work-life balance. At BAE Naval Ships, is it something that only working parents take up, or are non-parents encouraged to take this up as well? If people want to join the gym, or if they're training for an event, is it something that's rolled out everywhere to everybody? That's kind of an open all policy.
It's absolutely across the whole of naval ships. It's not something that's aimed at parents specifically at all. That's just my own personal example of why I use it. But I think the only difference that is, it's slightly different, obviously, in the production environment, physically building a ship. There are, some different matters that go into that. But in terms of being office-based, it's just a matter of manage your own time. So that's what it comes down to. I personally mainly use it for childcare, but I had a sporting event. I did a marathon earlier this year, and it meant that I was able to, for example, not have rigid lunch times. If I felt like going out and running a 5K at lunchtime, that's fine. It's my time to choose and do as I like, and then just maybe work a bit longer when I get home that evening.
Yeah. I know we've had examples within our business where people have been training, and it's great that you've got that flexibility, and it kind of shows BAE as a really forward-thinking organisation that values their employees and respects their employees to make the right decisions for them and for the business. That's really good. Carolyn, how does it work at PwC where you're at in terms of the smart working process?
So there's definitely a focus on output and getting the work done, and there's flexibility related to the location where you work and the time that you work, and that works both ways. We have to be very location very flexible with location, with meeting the demands of our clients, but the flexibility is there to work at home if we would like to, or if that suits us better, and also time as well. We can work early and then leave early, or work later, and flex that as well.
That's good. And I know for you, you're a career changer. How did that kind of really help sell PwC for you as a candidate going through that process?
It was a consideration for me. I've worked flexibly for a long time, actually. One of my first roles was in a sales role, and that was basically working from my car. So now it's much more comfortable working from home. So it was something that I was very used to. I'd seen the benefits from both sides, and it was definitely something that I wanted an organisation that supported me in that type of flexible working.
I know when I was part-time, one of the things that I kind of struggled with when I came back from maternity leave was if I was only working certain days, making sure that my colleagues knew when I was working and when I wasn't, sort of colleagues and clients. Do you have any kind of tips for anyone or any business that are kind of trying to manage the process of who's working when?
Well, I'm very clear about my working day, so I work Monday to Thursday. That's on every email I send out, and I let my colleagues know, every opportunity. So, I do get asked, can you meet on a Friday? And I say, well, no, that's not a working day. It's also very supportive here in terms of quite a few of my colleagues make use of flexible working, so they might be working in the evening and they'll send emails out. But on their footer, they'll also say that while I might be sending this email out late at night or at another time, I realise that it might not be your working time, so therefore I do not expect a response from you until you're back at work. So I find that quite helpful that, we're expected to respond during our working days, but outside those times we're not.
I think you can get kind of trapped in the, I'm going to respond to this email, and everything's digital now, isn't it? You've got your emails in your pocket if you've got your emails on your phone. So that's a very good point, making sure you're clear. What about you, Joanna? How do you kind of, is it similar practice with your footers and your emails, or internally does everybody know that we all work different hours, don't expect that you've got to respond back?
I think it's fairly standard practice because it's rolled out across the whole organisation. We're pretty good generally as a business about setting up our out of office for if we're going to be out. I don't currently work part-time or compressed hours. I have in the past. At a previous company, I worked the 5 days of work condensed into 4, and I did find exactly the same as Carolyn then. I had it flagged on my emails, and would generally people would know when I was off on Friday, although I did have a boss who kind of learned what time the baby napped and would tend to call me, and then I may answer more readily during that particular time. But yeah, absolutely, putting the email header and footer works. But I do also have a lot of colleagues who send emails late at night, and you're right, I haven't seen that message come through, and I don't expect you to respond straight away, but that is a great idea. I may suggest that to a few people.
Yeah, that is a really good one, Carolyn. Thank you for that. So what are the benefits of smart working then for an employer and for the employee? I mean, I can see from the employee side, you get to work that suits your lifestyle, but particularly from an employer, why would you say you guys do this?
From my point of view, I would say it absolutely creates loyalty. By having that employee value proposition where people will feel that they can maintain their life, and let's be honest, work is not the whole of our lives. We have so much else going on with us all the time, and to be able to have a situation where you can give things equal weight and equal priority and not be constantly putting off your home life for other things, that will create huge loyalty to your employer. It's fair, it's consistent. If we just did it for parents, as you mentioned earlier, then it just breeds up feelings of resentment between different groups of people. So for me, it's all about inclusion. It is all about making sure the workplace is as focused on inclusivity as possible. And by making smart working available for everybody and making sure that everyone realises no matter what your home life situation, it's valued and important, and we will give you time and space to deal with that, I think it will just make employers happy to come in and to do the work.
That's a great point, yeah. And I suppose by treating people as adults and showing that you really value their well-being, so whether that be the time with the family, whether that be you want to start later after you've watched the football, or whether that be you're training for a marathon, you're valuing their mental health and their well-being whilst at work. There's a big push to bring your whole self at work, and if you've got different responsibilities at home that aren't being supported, you can't do that. What about from recruitment then? Do you guys showcase your flexible working policy when you're advertising your roles to make sure that you're capturing as wide an audience as possible? Because I think that's a really good selling point for you guys.
I think it's definitely on the job descriptions that we put out. Whether we're doing as much as we can, maybe not. It's definitely something that's spoken about during the recruitment process. When I applied for my role, I actually turned it down the first time that it was offered to me because I didn't think that it would be flexible enough to support the needs I had then, as I think my son was just under 1. And it was through talking to the HR people who very kindly phoned me up and walked me through all of the smart working policy that I changed my mind and thought, no, actually this is a company I want to be part of. So I think you're right, it is a huge attraction for people, and I'm very open about the fact that it's one of the major reasons I joined BAE in the first place.
I suppose it's natural to think that yes, there's a smart working policy, but I've got to come in and prove myself, even if you're not coming in a management role. So that's a very good point. Yes, making sure that everybody feels free to take up this policy. How many leaders within the business do work flexibly? I know you do, or kind of.
You know what? We don't collect statistics on it because it's at that level. It's not necessarily everyone is empowered to approve effectively at certain levels their own timesheets. So I don't know from a leadership level if stats like that would be collected because it just becomes the way we work as a business.
Yeah, and that's your culture, and everybody can work the same, which is great. What about you, Carolyn? Then for you, how did you kind of approach your request for flexible working? Was it brought up naturally throughout the recruitment process, or did you have to go through a formally requesting that smart working arrangement?
Flexibility at PwC is just part of working here, and I think it's because it works both ways in terms of us being available to work at client sites. And the time is similar, and the organisation benefits because some of us work better in the morning, some of us work better in the afternoon, and we can tailor our working hours to that. But then we also benefit because we can be around for different events and the other things that take part in our personal lives. But it was brought up. It was part of the original package. When I was going through the recruitment process, I did ask whether I could work part-time, and a decision was made very quickly about that. I was very pleased to see that there was so much flexibility. I think there's one thing that I've been very pleased about since I've been here is around the fact that there's an idea of having non-negotiables. So, while flexibility works on both sides, there are certain things that you can say as an employee that aren't negotiable, that you need to be back, say, on a Monday night to carry out some sort of activity with your family. And I think that is a very, very good way of helping both sides benefit from the flexibility, but also having some boundaries.
That's really cool. That's really interesting. So how do you make sure everybody knows what your non-negotiables are? Is it between you and your manager? Is it between you and your team? Is it time that's blocked out in your diary? Or how do you manage that?
Well, so far for me, on a personal basis, it's been having time blocked out in my diary and making sure that's clear. But if things can be flexed, I will. But there are certain things that can't be, and that's accepted.
That's a really smart policy. I like that. I'm going to steal that. So what are your top tips for any business that want to implement smart working or agile working? What would your advice be to an employer that wants to do that?
It needs to be built on trust, and it's trust that works both ways. And I think it needs to be consistent across an organisation. And I think everybody needs to be clear, if you are working for part-time, what are the normal working days, and people need to respect those. But I think it's building that trust and that culture of trust.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say that the first thing has to be around the culture. Just rolling out a policy on smart working isn't going to do anything. Is making sure that the culture's in place, and it isn't a case of, yes, technically you're allowed to leave when you like, but people are going to have their eyes on you when you walk out the door. I'd say the other thing for an employer looking to put it in place is, assume first of all that any role can be done flexibly, and then work backwards from that. If you go in with that assumption, and then look at what can make it fit for purpose in slightly different groups of people or slightly different roles, then you're going to start off with a winner to begin with.
There's something called the psychological contract, which works both ways. And I think when somebody's coming into a business, my kind of top tip would be to make sure that you're checking in, even if they're brand new, or if they're brand new to flexible working, or brand new to returning after maternity leave. Is this working for you? Is this working for us? What more can we do to support each other? Because it's important to make sure that it is working, and that people aren't subconsciously calling you on your day off. Okay, what can we do to manage that? Because if you get a phone call on your day off, you can feel naturally a guilt that you need to answer that call or respond to that email at night, or we're in very much a digital age that you're constantly on. You need that downtime. So it's probably worth, if you've never heard of this, having a look at the psychological contract and what you can do as part of your either appraisals or keeping in touch with your employees to make sure that it is working, and what do we need to change to make this work for everybody and support each other. We've had a question from Ellie. Can you give any tips on how to go about asking for flexible working? Is it best to do this before applying for a role or at interview stage?
I would personally do it at both. I mean, I know different companies have different ways of recruiting. So, for example, you may use an outside recruitment agency and then not even talk to the managers involved until you're at that interview stage. So I would personally do it at both, just in case you're in a situation like this. This happens a lot with me with interviewing people, and we get asked questions a lot about flexible working, and it's to be quite honest, it's a question I love getting, because I've got a nice easy answer in terms of smart working. And it's always a nice question to have, and it's important not only for the employer to know that you're going to fit in with them, but also for you to know that you're going to fit in with the employer, and that your lifestyle will be made to work, and that you'll be made to feel valued for having that choice.
What about you, Carolyn? Would you agree with that? Is there anything else you want to add to that?
In terms of asking for part-time work, I would be tempted to leave it until you've been offered a job. Now, that might seem difficult, but for my particular situation, if I'd limited myself to just looking for part-time jobs, and those that said that they were part-time, I wouldn't have been able to apply for. I think I didn't find any that advertised part-time working. So for me, it was very much a case of actually going through the whole interview process and finding out what the organisation was like, and then seeing whether it could work part-time.
I would kind of agree with what you said, Carolyn. I don't think enough organisations showcase that they have smart, agile, flexible working, and I think you should always assume that you can ask the question if it's part-time. I think there shouldn't be prejudice for organisations when they're shortlisting candidates for interview on full-time or part-time. I think you should maybe mention it in the interview question what your situation is, and ask them what their policy is, so you kind of got an indication. But I do think, we're working with more organisations to get them to consider smart working and make it work for them. But you're right, when you're looking for jobs, not everybody advertises, and there are options for part-time working. They just don't think to advertise it or put it in the advert. What about you from a career change? I know that you've been through a career change, Carolyn. How did you go about that? What kind of process did you follow for that?
Career changing was very interesting in terms of finding a job, even though I was in an area that was in high demand. My CV was very different from the majority of candidates, and I did really realise early on that the key to me actually securing a role was networking, and I just did lots and lots and lots of networking and talking to a lot of people. And while it might seem hard work, it actually had two benefits. It had one, that the people I met were really encouraging and were helpful, even if they didn't have a job for me. And the other side of it was, in the end, that was what secured me a role. So people talk about networking, the importance of networking, and it can be difficult. But as I said, I found two benefits from it. And in the end, it was what made the difference.
I'd agree with you there from the networking side. I think it is important, whether it's daytime networking, evening, or trying to find out where your community hangs out, whether that be attending a sort of technical meetup where people are talking about what it's like working in the industry or talking about technical subjects. It is one of the things we tell everybody who wants to break into a new industry. Find your network, showcase yourself, build your personal brand, and really kind of push yourself out there, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And if that question is, can this be an opportunity to be part-time or smart working or agile, then definitely don't be afraid to ask that.
And that's where the networking was also crucial for me, because you find out about the companies. So, when you're talking to an individual, you quite often find out about the companies they've worked for previously, and you can find out what it's really, really, like to be actually working there, rather than just looking at what's on the job applications and the job adverts.
And it's in a comfortable setting as well. It's in normally a more relaxed setting, so you can kind of really see if are people living and breathing the culture that they're claiming they have, which is nice as well. You can kind of really get a feel for a culture. What about you, Joanna? Have you got any advice for employees or candidates, or from an agile working perspective?
To be quite, I haven't been a career changer, so it's kind of a different situation. I guess I was fairly lucky that I was already employed at a time when I really wanted to look at flexible working in terms of when I came back off maternity leave. So it wasn't something that I had to consider in a job search until I moved over to BAE, and then I guess I pretty much lucked out by landing somewhere with that smart working policy. So it's not something I've personally had to go through, but I do interview a lot of people who do rely on smart working and do bring it up at all levels within the process. But yeah, like I say, it's not something that I've had to be involved with.
Okay. Are there any more questions from the floor?
Yeah, I've got one if you don't mind. It's Claire Farrow here. So I've seen in a lot of organisations over the years when I've worked in various businesses, the employee who works reduced hours or works from home having to almost go out of their way to justify that they're working because they're obviously not seen and visible in the office. Do you think that there should be more responsibility on the employer to instill this culture and ensure that that person who is working slightly different hours to most other people within the organisation don't feel that they're being monitored or watched by their colleagues?
So I have to say, I don't necessarily, and this might be a controversial one, I don't think the onus is on the employer there. I think that the onus is on the individual doing the work. So I had this when I was at my previous company, and I worked the set amount of hours for the week was condensed into 4 days. And I felt very grateful for that opportunity because of the experiences it let me have outside of it. And as a result of that, I in my team, whenever something came up that needed to be done, I was always the first to volunteer because I was just so grateful and wanted to prove that I was still working and working hard. And my whole team spent some time with the leadership coach, and that was one of the big things that he picked up on for me was, you don't need to be grateful and do extra just because, you have this flexible working. You're doing a good job as it is, and, no one else thinks less of you for working 4 days a week. That's in your own head. And it was more that I had to get over that rather than that there was anything the employer was doing that made me feel that way.
Brilliant, thank you.
Are there any more questions coming through? I can't see anybody typing. Whilst we give people a chance to ask any more questions, I just want to thank you both so much for your time. I'm sure it's really helpful for both businesses and employees. Carolyn and Joanna, if you want to summarise, would you say if there's one top tip for an employer or an employee who wants to go for smart working, what would that be?
For an employer, I would say, you have to change the culture. For an employee, I would say go in assuming that the answer is yes and showing how it can be done if there's not a policy in place, because, it's very rare that a job cannot be done flexibly. So just go in assuming the answer is yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Joanna. What about you, Carolyn?
Well, I'd agree with both of those, but I would also make sure that you're very clear in your head on your boundaries and clear on what those non-negotiables are, because they are the bits that if work starts creeping into those areas, you feel resentful, and that's not good. So make sure you're clear on your non-negotiables. And normally it's not many, and so it's very workable. But if you're clear on them, that really helps.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, both of you.
Can I just interject really quickly, because actually the sort of notion of performance over presence is really important for me, not necessarily from an agile working perspective in terms of compressed hours, but actually because my role requires me to be on client site throughout the course of the day. And so again, I'm just, I have that element of people can't see me in the office, so they need to know where I am and what I'm doing. And I'm really keen to hear great stories from businesses such as PwC and BAE Systems about the work that you are doing, such as smart working, because I think, times are changing and more businesses are moving into this notion of performance over presence. Somebody actually told me over the weekend of a business in Cheltenham where they've actually now reduced the working week to 4 days. They haven't reduced their employees' pay. They've just said, do you know what, actually, let's finish on a Thursday. We can get everything done in those 4 days. So I'm personally really keen to hear all of these great stories. And you can contact myself or Rosie on diversity@outsource-uk.co.uk or via LinkedIn. And if you do hear of any other businesses that are doing similar things to Joanna's business, then please do let me know, because I think the more we can get the message out there, the more things will change.
Agreed, that's great, Claire. Who are the business, can we ask?
Sorry, I didn't catch that then, Rosie.
I wonder who's the business, and I wonder how they're doing that. That's a great example. I'm sure plenty of people would want to work that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's brilliant. I don't actually know. I'm waiting for the person that told me about it over the weekend to put me in contact with them. So I don't actually know the company name, but it's a PR firm based in Cheltenham. And I just think it's a really great example of how businesses are starting to appreciate that it doesn't mean you've got to be sitting at your desk from 9 till 5 days a week to get your job done.
Not just that, I'm sure all of their competitors' staff are thinking, hang on, I want to go and work for them. It was just a great pull of talent for them as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time, both Joanna and Carolyn. Thank you for spending the time with us. It's really, really helpful. You can look both Joanna and Carolyn up on LinkedIn. So I'm sure if you've got any additional questions after the webinar, if you want to send them a LinkedIn request, I'm sure that's fine. Is that okay with both of you?
That's fine.
Yeah, fine with me.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for your time. That's really, really helpful.
Thank you, everybody, for dialing in today as well. Got Emma, I can see Ellie's typing something. Oh, Ellie said thank you. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Enjoy your week.
Bye-bye.